The Netherlands Grand Prix in Zandvoort is always one of the most anticipated of the season, especially after the summer break, when the teams have had time to make adjustments and improvements. For Ferrari, this 2025 GP should have been an opportunity to resurface, especially with a pilot as experienced as Lewis Hamilton at the wheel. However, the reality was completely different. After FP1, the expectations were low, but Ferrari did his best to make quick adjustments in the car. Despite these efforts, afternoon practices FP2 were not much better. Hamilton improved his time, but still remained in the 6th position, which, although it represented a slight improvement, remained insufficient to reach the McLaren, who led the classification. The 8/10th deficit with respect to McLaren was the other great sign that Ferrari was far from being competitive. In this second session, Hamilton also suffered another incident, a spin in curve 9 when touching the grass, which made him lose control of his Ferrari. This error, although it was not serious, reflected the pilot's difficulties to find the perfect balance in a car that did not behave as expected. The lack of confidence in the car was beginning to be evident, something very uncommon in a pilot with Hamilton's experience. All this joined the comments of his teammate, Charles Leclerc, who described Friday as probably the worst Friday of the season. And it wasn't for less. Ferrari was not only fighting with his own car, but also with the pressure of being competing in a circuit where the reliability and the performance of the car were crucial. What seemed a promising beginning for the 2025 season was quickly becoming a crisis for Ferrari. The signs that the SF-25 was not up to the expectations became evident, and the performance of Hamilton in particular was making it clear that the team had to make deep changes if they wanted to fight again for the top positions. This scenario not only affected Hamilton personally, but also the team as a whole, which was beginning to face the harsh reality that McLaren, Mercedes and Red Bull were one step ahead. However, the reality was that the improvements in the SF-25 setup during the FP2 did not bring the expected results. Despite the adjustments made, Hamilton improved his time and ascended to the 6th position, which indicated certain progress. But the difference remained significant, 8/10ths of a disadvantage against the McLaren, a team that had shown an impressive rhythm from the beginning of the weekend. McLaren seemed to be operating at another level, with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri very ahead in the classification, demonstrating the gap that Ferrari still had to close if he wanted to be competitive. This deficit was not only a matter of times but also of trust. Although Hamilton seemed to be starting to find his rhythm, the car was still not offering the security that he normally expects from a Formula car. The pilot's sensations, beyond technical improvement, were still of frustration. The difficulties in adapting their conduction style to SF-25 manifested in incidents such as the spin in curve 9 in the FP2, a loss of control that underlined the lack of stability and precision in the car. While it was not a serious incident, it was indicative of the underlying problems of SF-25. At the same time, the team was taking note of Hamilton's technical problems and looking for fast solutions. The change of engineer, with Johannes Hatz replacing Ricardo Corte as a performance engineer, reflected the despair of finding a solution to the chronic problems of the car. This change was not only a technical adjustment, but also a strategic decision to better adapt to Hamilton's needs. Hatz, with their experience in Red Bull Racing and Porsche Motorsport, contributed a fresh perspective and a new approach that was expected to make a significant difference. In FP1, the height of the car and the suspension settings had not been helpful and, on the contrary, further complicated the handling for Hamilton. However, in an attempt to correct these problems, the modifications in the setup carried out during the night between Friday and Saturday, such as the change in the preload of the differential, were implemented without the knowledge of Hamilton, which further committed the balance of the car. Ferrari was caught between two worlds. On the one hand, they wanted to adjust the car enough to improve Hamilton's stability, but on the other hand, the team could not ignore the difference in performance with McLaren, which had already shown a much more solid race pace. Despite Hamilton's improvement in FP2, the car was still far from offering the control and response characteristics that a pilot of his caliber needs to be competitive in the current Formula One. In parallel, communication within the team also became an important factor at this point. Technical information management and telemetry data acquired during the practices was key. While Hamilton was still looking for a connection with the car, engineers had to interpret their needs correctly and make the appropriate settings. The entrance of Johannes Hatz meant a new opportunity to reorganize priorities and work more closely with Hamilton, who until that moment had been fighting with the synchronization of the adjustments and expectations of previous engineers. In terms of performance, Ferrari's team was not yet up to McLaren and Mercedes, and the data obtained during Friday's practices were a clear reflection of that distance. The difference in times and positions in the classification already showed that Ferrari had a lot of work to do. The lack of a constant rhythm, Hamilton's trumpers and errors were a sign that the SF-25 was not prepared to offer the pilot the confidence it needs to take the car to the limit. This complicated start for Ferrari in Zandvoort marked a turning point in his season. Although Ferrari had shown potential in previous races, this weekend he showed that the team needed more than simple setup settings. They needed a structural solution that allowed them to cut the distance with the pointer equipment. Hamilton, meanwhile, continued to fight, but the challenge was colossal. The frustration of a pilot accustomed to being the best in the world in front of a car that was not up to their expectations was palpable, and the team had to react quickly to prevent this problem from becoming a ballast for the rest of the season. One of the main technical problems that arose during the practices was the erratic behavior of the car in the curves, especially in the most demanding such as Curve 3 and Curve 9, where Hamilton suffered the two trumps. These areas of the circuit, which require precise management and a car with good adhesion, highlighted the SF-25 aerodynamic deficiencies. Despite being a new generation car, Ferrari did not seem to have controlled instability. The car did not provide the necessary feedback so that Hamilton could quickly adjust to the changing conditions of the track. The SF-25 configuration seemed to be poorly balanced in several key aspects, from the distribution of weights to the suspension configuration. The adjustment in the preload of the differential that was implemented during the night between the FP1 and the FP2, for example, aimed to improve the traction in curve output, but the effect was counterproductive. The stability of the rear of the car was compromised, which resulted in a lack of trust for Hamilton, who had been very clear about the feeling that the car was never in place during the first practices. Another significant technical problem was the aerodynamic balance of the car. The SF-25 seemed to be very loaded on the front axle, which caused the car to easily handle high-speed curves. Unlike McLaren and Mercedes cars, which demonstrated a greater capacity to stand firm in the curves, Ferrari's SF-25 suffered in this aspect. The team tried to mitigate these problems with car adjustments, but those changes failed to generate the necessary response. The key here is that the aerodynamic adjustments prior to the weekend were not enough to make the car feel natural on the track, and that was reflected in Hamilton's return times. The fact that Hamilton ended in the 6th position in the FP2, and with a considerable deficit with respect to leaders, was not a simple bad day. It was a reflection of the serious technical problems that persist in Ferrari, especially with regard to aerodynamic stability and car configuration. The SF-25 not only seemed difficult to handle, but did not offer the necessary confidence so that Hamilton could make the most of his experience and skills at the wheel. The change in the technical structure of the team with the arrival of Johannes Hatz as a new performance engineer for Hamilton was an attempt to find a solution to problems. However, this change was more a temporary patch than a long-term solution. Although Hatz has a solid technical training, the SF-25 still faced fundamental problems that would not be solved overnight. The first signs that this car was not up to the competition made it clear that Ferrari needed more than an engineer change. They needed a revolution at the design base and a more strategic approach at the development level. Despite the technical difficulties, Hamilton's ability and experience were never in doubt. While the car did not respond in the way he expected, it could be seen how the pilot tried to adapt as well as possible. However, the SF-25 was designed for a type of driving that was not completely aligned with Hamilton's strengths. While McLaren and Mercedes continued to show consistency, Ferrari struggled to understand how to maximize the performance of his car. This weekend in Zandvoort also made it clear that the road to success for Ferrari in 2025 would not be easy. The team needed to make deep structural adjustments in their car and its technical approach. Meanwhile, Hamilton, who had been signed to be the leader of the team, was fighting not only against competition, but also against the limitations of his own car. Finally, Zandvoort performance was just a small sample of what Ferrari must overcome to be competitive again in the fight for the championship. The technical disadvantage compared to McLaren and Mercedes became evident, and with each race, Ferrari faced the pressure not only to fix the technical problems, but also to adjust its strategy to not lose even more ground. The question that remained in the air after the GP of the Netherlands was clear. Can Ferrari find a quick and effective solution for the SF-25, or will it be another lost year? Only time will say it, but what was clear is that Hamilton and Ferrari will have to face huge challenges if they want to return to the top.